What's up, everybody? It's me, Johnny, here with my reactions to Dana White's announcements for the cards of UFC 324 and 325. We won't have a podcast episode this week because if you missed the big news, Rob and his wife Sophia just had a little baby girl called Azura. So huge congratulations to them. In the meantime, I'll be taking over the reins for the channel just to keep things active. As soon as we can have a new podcast episode up, I will let you know in the community tab on the channel. So as I mentioned, I want to talk about the cards for UFC 324 and 325. This news is a few days old now. Obviously, Dana White announced it earlier this week, and it caused a bit of an uproar in the community, all right? People clearly weren't happy with both main events of both main cards. We have Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett for the interim lightweight title. We talk about that in a second. And obviously, we have Volk versus Lopes 2 for the featherweight title for UFC 325. People aren't happy with either of these main events. We're going to be talking about why. We're going to be talking about my opinions as well, because I've read a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts. I've listened to a lot of opinions and a lot of thoughts about both of these main events, and I've formulated my own opinions, and I hope you enjoyed this video. So let's start off talking about UFC 324 on the 24th of January in the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, USA. We do have Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett for the interim lightweight title. Now, obviously, Ilia Topuria is still your undisputed lightweight champion, right? He has not vacated the belt. He's not moving up to fight Islam Makhachev, but he is allowing the UFC to move on with the lightweight division. He's allowing the lightweight division to move on because it seems like he's dealing with a fairly messy divorce with his ex-partner, and he tweeted out that he wants to focus on his family and not be caught up training and all of that kind of stuff. So he's letting the division move on, and kudos to him for doing that, because now we actually can have an interim lightweight fight and see some movement in the lightweight division as opposed to just seeing Ilia Topuria on the sidelines waiting. So, you know, it was a really good call from him. And now we have Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett for the interim lightweight title. So this is obviously very interesting because there is a big omission in the eyes of many, including mine as well. There is no Arman Tsarukyan. Where is your legitimate number one contender for the lightweight division? Where is Arman Tsarukyan? Where is the Arman Tsarukyan that just in the UFC Fight Night in Qatar absolutely rolled through Dan Hooker? Where is Arman Tsarukyan, the guy that was set to fight Islam Makhachev and obviously pulled out due to, let's call it injury. Some people say that he was masking an injury. Some people say that he got up to shenanigans with Nina Drama. Whatever happened there, he was set to fight for the title. He then weighed in as the backup for the next title fight, I believe. And then obviously he's just rolled through Dan Hooker, and he was your main event in UFC Qatar, in the first Fight Night in Qatar as well. So where is Arman Tsarukyan? That is the big question. Before we get into my thoughts, first let's hear a message from today's video sponsor, PIA VPN. Private Internet Access, or PIA for short, is a world-class virtual private network, or VPN, which hides your IP address and encrypts your internet connection. With over 30 million downloads and an excellent Trustpilot rating, it really does live up to that phrase, world-class. One of the biggest benefits of using PIA is that it works with all major streaming services like Netflix. This means you'll be able to access region-restricted movies, TV shows, and sports events from across the world, which may not otherwise be available in your country. Watching Netflix without PIA is like paying for a UFC fight card, but not getting to watch all the fights. So don't get caught out by not using it. Also, PIA has servers in 91 countries and across all 50 states in the US, so you'll never be again restricted from watching a fight due to blackouts. Plus, PIA is available for all platforms, including Windows, macOS, Android, and iOS. And they even have this awesome new feature where you can use one subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. So even though you might have PIA on your computer, you can still pick up your phone, pick a region, and easily turn on the VPN whenever you please. And thanks to PIA, viewers of Arcade all have access to a very special offer. By clicking our promo link, piavpn.com/MMArcade, in the description, or by scanning the QR code, you can get an 83% discount on private internet access and an extra 4 months completely for free. So don't miss out, and a huge thank you to Private Internet Access for supporting the Arcade podcast. Now, back to the episode. Alrighty, so we're back, and let's talk about the omission of Arman Tsarukyan in this interim lightweight title bout. Obviously, Arman Tsarukyan deserves to be in this spot. He absolutely deserves to be in this spot. It's clear, though, that he's still in the bad books of the UFC, and it's also clear that the UFC is not a meritocracy anymore. This is about entertainment, it's about who's popular, it's about timing, it's about who the UFC believes is going to make for a better fight, especially when it comes to a title fight, right? I've started to enjoy the UFC much more when I've let go of that, when I've let go of who's the legitimate, merit-based number one contender. I've let go of that because otherwise I'm just going to get upset. I'm just going to get myself riled up. If you looked at it on paper, of course, Arman Tsarukyan deserves to be in that spot. He's the number one contender. He just beat Dan Hooker. He beat Charles Oliveira by split decision, and he KO'd Beneil Dariush, and he was set to fight Islam Makhachev. However, he kind of pissed off the UFC, and he pissed off the UFC. He's still in their bad books, and for whatever reason, the UFC seemingly doesn't like this guy, and they don't want him fighting for the title. It's not as if like he's not popular. Like, he's actually gained a bit of a following online. He's a known name in the UFC. He's a known name in MMA in general. It's not that he's not deserving. It's just the UFC, I think, still, I rubbed a little bit the wrong way. Dana White clearly is rubbed a little bit the wrong way. That must be what's going on here a little bit. But also Bedtime MMA, shout out to him, had a pretty interesting theory as well. He believes that the UFC did have Arman Tsarukyan set to fight Ilia Topuria, and then they had Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett in the mix as well, and that was being negotiated. So then when Ilia Topuria pulled out, the UFC was like, well, we've already got this fight negotiated, the contracts are signed, let's just promote Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett as the interim lightweight title bout. It's a very, very interesting theory. I don't know how I feel about it, because if it was signed, maybe they had no choice to make it the interim lightweight title bout. But if that was the case, the contracts would have to have been renegotiated anyways. And I'm sure that there is a clause in there which says if circumstances change, we can change the fight even if you sign it. I don't know what these contracts are like, but it is an interesting theory. However, I just go back to the fact that the UFC is just kind of annoyed that Arman Tsarukyan did them dirty with that fight against Islam Makhachev, and they had to have Renato Moicano, come in at the last second, and it just wasn't as exciting of a title fight at that card. So that's what I'm thinking is what is going on here. Yes, Arman Tsarukyan absolutely does deserve it, but let's talk about Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett. Look, if you look at the top 5 rankings of this division, those two probably make the most sense. Again, excluding Arman Tsarukyan, they probably make the most sense out of anyone else to be in this title fight, right? Because when you have number 2, Charles Oliveira, he just submitted Mateusz Gamrot. It was a phenomenal win. However, before that, he was KO'd by Ilia Topuria. And then you have Max Holloway at 3, who obviously just beat Dustin Poirier in a decision. And before that, he lost to Ilia Topuria by KO. So you have these two guys in Charles and Max that have a very recent loss, both of them to the champion, both of them by brutal KO. They weren't going to go into the title opportunity, right? And apparently what the UFC is doing is negotiating a BMF title fight between Charles Oliveira and Max Holloway. That is awesome, because whoever wins out of that is arguably in line to be fighting for the title next. And then what happens to Arman Tsarukyan after that? I'm really worried about Arman, because it's like, no matter what he does, he's just never going to get a title fight. Let's see what happens. And then when you go back down to the list, and number 4, you have Justin Gaethje, who just beat Fiziev. But obviously, he lost to Max Holloway by knockout there. Let me talk about that in a second. And then you have Paddy Pimblett, who TKO'd Michael Chandler, submitted Bobby Green, and defeated Tony Ferguson via decision, right? So if you go down the list like that, again, excluding Arman Tsarukyan, Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett somewhat makes sense, right? Somewhat makes sense. However, some would argue that maybe Justin isn't deserving to be in there. At least he's not as deserving as Paddy Pimblett. Paddy Pimblett, he's hugely popular. He's on a win streak. It makes sense for him to be there. I kind of wanted him to see Ilia Topuria if the UFC fight Ilia Topuria, that is, if the UFC weren't going to put Arman Tsarukyan in there. I understand Paddy more. Justin Gaethje, I do not, because he was just KO'd by Max Holloway. It only makes sense if Max is injured, which apparently is the case right now. If Max is actually injured, then Justin Gaethje makes sense to be in this spot fighting Paddy Pimblett for the interim title. So look, it's an interesting fight. Don't get me wrong. Like, Gaethje versus Pimblett is quite exciting. I think these two are going to have good banter between each other. Stylistically, it's quite an interesting fight. I would love to see if Paddy Pimblett can just out wrestle and out grapple Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje, obviously heavy hitter, big kicks, big strikes. It's just going to be a fun fight. I'm very, very interested to see how this goes. Currently, at the moment, I am leaning towards Paddy Pimblett winning this one. And then Dana White did say, again, feeling sorry for Arman Tsarukyan, Dana White explicitly said that whoever wins out of this fight is fighting Ilia Topuria next. So what happens for the rest of the division? Like, what does Arman Tsarukyan need to do? Because if you do have Charles versus Max Holloway, one of them could easily go back into the title opportunity. They always want to give Charles Oliveira the title fight. They'll easily give Max Holloway the title fight if he KOs Charles Oliveira, because then he'd be fighting either Ilia Topuria or the winner of Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett. All of it makes sense. I just don't know what you are going to do with Arman Tsarukyan when he's your clear, legitimate number one contender. But in the eyes of the UFC, he probably needs another win. Who knows? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But to summarize my opinions, Arman Tsarukyan should be in there, but if he's not going to be in there because the UFC is still holding a grudge, then Gaethje versus Pimblett makes sense. I think it's an exciting fight. And then you have Oliveira versus Holloway for the BMF title. Maybe Arman Tsarukyan needs to fight Gamrot and get that win, because he obviously lost the Gamrot. Gamrot lost to Charles Oliveira. That kind of makes sense there as well. Arman probably should have been a little bit more active this year. Apparently he was offered the Gamrot fight at some stage. Maybe if he did that and then fought Dan Hooker, he could be fighting for the title now. But who the hell knows, all right? Let's keep moving on. Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes for the undisputed women's bantamweight title. It's awesome to see Amanda Nunes back. This is the fight that we were obviously all asking for. It is very much a super fight. I am very curious as to why this isn't the main event. I did watch Ariel Helwani's video on this. He believes that it's kind of disgraceful, or that it's kind of offensive that Harrison versus Nunes is not the main event over an interim lightweight title fight. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think it's a great co-main, but if this was the main event, I could see people being very, very pissed about that. Even more so pissed about the card because of Arman Tsarukyan not being in there. So look, tomato, it's in there. It's a great fight. It's a great co-main as well. You've also got Sean O'Malley versus Song Yadong. This is a really, really interesting fight. Sean O'Malley looking to bounce back after 2 losses to Merab, and Song Yadong just beat Henry Cejudo in that really weird technical decision win over Henry Cejudo with that accidental eye poke. So that was interesting. And then obviously you got Waldo Cortez Acosta versus Derek Lewis. Cortez Acosta is keeping incredibly active. Apparently, when he fights Derek Lewis, he would have fought 6 times in the space of a year, which apparently is a record. That is insane. Obviously, they're not all wins. He did lose in the middle of that, but still, he's keeping very active, and he's fighting Derek Lewis. He just beat Shamil Gaziev and Ante Delia in the space of 3 weeks. Insane. KO'd both of them. And then Derek Lewis just TKO'd Talison Teixeira and Rodrigo Nascimento. Look, I will never, ever, ever rule out Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis has huge, huge hands. I think he could actually knock out Waldo Cortez Acosta. But if you kind of sense the way things are going, Waldo Cortez Acosta, I think, is my favorite at the moment to win, because if he does, then you got a new legitimate contender in the heavyweight division. But then if Derek Lewis wins, you could easily chuck in Derek Lewis in there in the mix. Whenever, the Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gahn thing gets worked out. So very interesting fight. Finally, Arnold Allen is back. He's fighting John Silva. Arnold Allen defeated Giga Chikadze last year. He's been fairly inactive, but obviously he lost to Movsar and Holloway before that. No bad losses by any means, or the very, very hard losses to take, from some very top contenders. And obviously John Silva just got TKO'd by Diego Lopes, but before that he did submit Bryce Mitchell, and he was on a bit of a tear in the division. So I'm so excited to see this fight. I wouldn't say it's a sleeper fight, because those in the know how good Arnold Allen is, know how good John Silva is. This one's going to be a banger. These two are just going to be throwing hands. Can't wait to see this. I want to see Arnold Allen win. I really do. I think he can get it done. Next up as well, we've got Alexa Grasso versus Rose Namajunas, and then Umar Nurmagomedov keeping busy. Good on him versus Davison Figueiredo. Umar just beat Mario Batista. He did say that he probably could, just wait for a title fight against Merab. The UFC probably would have given it to him, but he's staying busy. He is staying busy after his fight against Mario Batista. He's wanting to fight Davison Figueiredo. So really good on him. I think he needs to keep active. He needs to keep his skills sharp, because he needs all of that. He needs to continue to build up his cardio if he wants any chance against what's his name? Bloody hell, Merab Dvalishvili, right? And then obviously Figueiredo, he has a split decision win recently over Montel Jackson. But before that, he lost to Corey Sandhagen with that weird knee injury, but he was very much losing that fight anyways. This is an interesting one. I think the clear favorite, of course, is Umar. And if Umar does beat Davison Figueiredo, he's easily walking back into the title opportunity versus Merab Dvalishvili. So let's see what happens there. And next up, we've got January 31. Is that only a week later? That is crazy. January 31, UFC 325. in my hometown, in Sydney, Australia, Kudos Bank Arena, we have Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes, number 2, for the undisputed featherweight title. I am so torn about this fight because, look, it's going to be a great fight. We know that it's going to be a great fight. It's going to be exciting. Their first fight was entertaining, even though Volkanovski clearly won. It was still entertaining. Their second one's going to be entertaining. Diego Lopes always has a puncher's chance. Look at just what happened with Jean Silva, right? He lost a round, then he came back with that spinning elbow, and he TKO'd him, right? So Lopes always has a chance. He got a good number of shots against Volkanovski, dropped him in that first fight as well. So it's going to be exciting. We know that it's going to be a fun fight to watch. However, it just feels wrong to have Volk fight Diego Lopes again after he just beat Jean Silva. Like, that doesn't make sense. Why would Volk fight the same guy 2 times in a row? This feels very, very reminiscent of Merab versus Sean O'Malley. At least with that, Sean was the champion, and there was some sort of a reason. I didn't agree with that, right? But there was some sort of a reason for them to have that immediate rematch. At least Sean was the champion, even though he didn't have a win in between. Diego Lopes was the contender, and he lost, I believe, 4 rounds to 1. And he only beat Jean Silva, who was not top 5. So why does it make sense for him to walk straight into that title opportunity and for Volk to fight the same dude twice that he beat handedly before, when you've got 2 very, very clear contenders in Movsar Evloev and Lerone Murphy? It honestly does not make too much sense. Movsar, he just beat Aljamain Sterling via decision, Arnold Allen via decision, and let's remember, he beat Diego Lopes, and he still hasn't had a title opportunity, but Diego Lopes somehow is about to get his second one. That doesn't make sense. He's also undefeated. You know who else is undefeated? Lerone Murphy. He just beat Aaron Pico via a brutal spinning elbow KO. Obviously, he beat Josh Emmett by decision and also Dan Ige by decision. These 2 guys are very clearly the ones that should have been in there over Diego Lopes. Yeah, I guess the UFC really want a Mexican/Brazilian champion. That's probably the reason why they're doing this. But it still doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me. I think Diego Lopes needed another win, whether it was against Movsar or whether it was against Lerone. It should have been one of those 2 in there instead of Diego. And I loved seeing Diego. Like, you should have seen my reaction to Diego versus Jean Silva. I was up on my couch. I was yelling. I was like, let's go, Diego Lopes. I love this dude. I love him as a fighter. He deserves everything coming for him, right? He deserves everything in the world. He's such a humble guy. He's a good guy, incredibly exciting fighter. What is there not to love about Diego Lopes? So trust me, I love the guy, I get it, but still at this current point in time, there are 2 more deserving fighters in Movsar and Lerone Murphy. They're both undefeated. They both have a legitimate claim to be the number 1 contender. Movsar is actually a legitimate number 1 contender, just like Arman Tsarukyan is your number 1 contender in lightweight. It just doesn't make too much sense. I don't think we should be considering Yair Rodriguez or Aljamain Sterling. Do you remember, though, those rumors that apparently it was going to be Yair versus Alexander Volkanovski? Thankfully, we don't have that fight because I would have lost my crap, right? I'd prefer Diego Lopes in there versus Yair Rodriguez. But what we really should have had because of the beef between them, it should have been Diego versus Yair Rodriguez and then Movsar versus Lerone Murphy, if they wanted to give Volk a break. But honestly, Volk wanted to fight in December. So it just should have been Volk versus Movsar or Volk versus Lerone Murphy, and you figure out one of the other guys with a different fight, right? Maybe it could be Lerone versus Aljamain Sterling, or I don't know, like just figure it out another way. But Diego Lopes to be in there for the second time in a row, it's just quite silly. So I don't understand this one. I guess I don't understand this one more than the previous one with Arman Tsarukyan getting left out because Arman really did piss off the UFC. But anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Interested to see your reactions. But these are going to be exciting cards. Nevertheless, they're going to be exciting cards. I'm going to try my best to make it to UFC 325 because I missed the last one in Perth. Sydney's a little bit easier for me to get to. Hopefully, I can finally see Rob in person and we can record some content in person. But until next time, this has been Johnny. Please take care of yourselves. And I will see you hopefully in the next podcast episode.